the program is pretty good.
Yeah.
All right, guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to talk about this. My SPR build on an Anderson lower that I have affectionately termed my MK12 MOD Murph. Now, long-term viewers of the channel will know that I have already reviewed this rifle. So if you're looking for the nitty-gritty details and all that kind of stuff of all the features and why I picked things and why I preferenced what I did, go ahead and check the link in the description to the original video. You'll get all of that there. Today, this is a revisit. So we are primarily going to focus on some stuff in the comments section, addressing some things that were brought up there, talking about how the rifle's been performing, changes that I might make to it, things that are going well, things that need to be updated, and then kind of my final thoughts at the end. All right, so with that, first off, something that we have to address out of the comments section. In the previous video, actually, before we even get into that, you guys will notice that this is not a faithful reproduction of a MK12, and it was never meant to be. This was meant to be my spin on a MK12, something that I think using modern features would achieve the same overall effect. So if you're looking for a faithful reproduction, go ahead and I guess check out other videos. There's a ton on the internet. All right, with that, something that was brought up previously in the last review that kind of came up in the comment section, and that was the term that I used to describe the meaning of SPR, which was, in that video, I stated after they went away from the Special Purpose Receiver designation, they then went to the Special Operations Precision Rifle or something along those lines. Somebody pointed out in the comment section that that is not accurate. I read that in an article somewhere. I know I did. I cannot find the article in order to be able to link it. So with that being the case, I'm going to go ahead and clarify the meaning of SPR. When the SOP mod program was started, it was originally supposed to be built around a receiver that could be adapted to different purposes. You could pop a 10.3 on there, you could pop a 14.5, or you could pop an 18-inch upper onto this receiver. And this is where we get the Special Purpose Receiver designation that was originally started. However, it was decided that for the 18-inch gun, they really wanted a more precision-minded trigger, a more match-grade trigger, and they didn't necessarily feel like a match-grade trigger was needed in the other barrel lengths. This decision seems odd. It should seem odd. You should be sitting there kind of scratching your head right now like, why wouldn't they want a good trigger in all of the options? I don't know the exact answer, but I have, at the very least, my interpretation of events that probably happened. It's probably a combination of the stuff that we're about to talk about here. This is a little bit of a rabbit hole, so if you're not interested in this, go ahead and check the description and jump ahead to content that you actually want to consume. Now, whenever it is that you're talking about putting together a technical data package for anything, a radio, a vehicle, whatever it is that it may be, a requirement has to be written. And things that are specified in the requirement are the things that are important. If you change anything about the requirement, you have to kind of start the vetting process all over again. And I think when it was decided that they didn't want necessarily to have a match grade trigger and everything else, or perhaps highlighting that they did want a match grade trigger combined with the 18-inch barrel, was going to put the program on hold, the SOP mod program on hold, in order to be able to start the vetting process all over again. When you rewrite the requirement, you then have to look at the impact that that has overall. So if they were originally going to go with mil-spec triggers for everything, and now they've decided to go after a match grade trigger for everything, they have to go through the process of testing the match grade triggers, putting in like cost estimates and all that kind of stuff. It completely restarts everything all over one thing. Whereas if you diversify it, yeah, you got to start that process all over, but you can move forward with the other systems at that point. Well, why not just do that? Like, why wouldn't you want to give your guys a better overall trigger and all that kind of stuff? And a lot of that, and again, I'm not entirely certain on this. This is just my interpretation of available information. A lot of that might very well come down to acceptance of risk. Putting lighter weight triggers in guns can be can lead to some types of disaster, right, guys? Touching off rounds sooner than they want to. Perhaps a reliability issue, because when you put lighter triggers and stuff, it may not reliably set off primers. If you're doing some like precision type stuff and you have a click, no bang, well, yeah, that's not necessarily the best thing, but you're probably doing this at distance. You have the ability and cover to be able to rack that round out and try to get the next one to go. If you're doing it in CQB type situations, that click could be deafening and definitely life-changing. So when it comes to acceptance of risk, when we're talking about at the SOCOM level, those muckety mucks are like, I don't really know about it. But we've seen all throughout like the GWAT and since then, plenty of circumstances where operators have changed a lot about their rifles. And that's kind of a tricky thing whenever it is that you're talking about the military. When you're talking about guns going to depot and stuff like that, or standards and what can be changed, what cannot be changed, there's a lot of people who have a say in what goes on with that. So somebody at a higher level in SOCOM might be like, I am unwilling to provide everybody a match grade trigger. Whereas perhaps a battalion commander or an ODA's alpha might be like, you know what, if it makes your gun run better, go ahead and do it. I don't really care. And honestly, if we like that enough, if everyone's like, man, that guy really does have a pretty sweet trigger in his rifle, why don't we go ahead and order these for the whole team? Senior Charlie, go ahead and order the parts that we need. And now you've got everyone on that team with whatever it is, optic, all that kind of stuff. Whereas in some places, like that's all well and good for soft guys. They're going to buy good stuff. If you talk about your normal soldier, you might have a guy who's like, well, I can change anything I want about my rifle. And next thing you know, he's putting like super cheap stuff on there. He's buying like NC Star. He's got their whole catalog draped all over his rifle. And this was an issue actually at one point in GWAT when it came to personally acquired like plates and vests and all that kind of stuff, where guys were kind of cheaping out. And it turns out those things were not ballistically rated like they were stated, all that kind of stuff. And it's why like conventional forces don't necessarily get away with it, because commanders are unwilling to accept risk. But in an ODA, a commander might be more willing to accept risk, might allow their guys to be able to adapt their stuff. And you see the same type of thing in law enforcement as well. Lots of police departments or agencies have a list out there of like optics that can be used on handguns or rifles for that matter, or triggers that you can or can't drop in because it may or may not nullify like the safety features of the handgun and all that kind of stuff. Those things play a part. So to get back on track here, they decide to can the special purpose receiver idea. The SOP mod program becomes more about making the M4 better, being able to better adapt it to changing conditions and the current fight and all that kind of stuff. And then the Mark 12 gets its own program, which is the special purpose rifle at that point. And that is how we kind of go through that development process there. So just want to go ahead and clarify, yeah, I was wrong, and I think it's super important, especially when you're somebody who's making recommendations to a wide viewership and all that kind of stuff, that you own your mistakes and you make sure that you're culpable for what it is that you did. So I swear I read it somewhere. It seemed like a credible source. Cannot find it at the site, so got to eat a little humble pie on that one. All right, back on track here. Something else that I brought up in the previous video and has come up quite frequently in the comments section is the gassing of this rifle. Now, when it comes to ejection and all that kind of stuff, I have perfect gassing. It's coming out at like right around like 4 o'clock and stuff like that. Lands in a nice, neat little pile and does so very consistently. I am still having a problem with consistent last shot hold open with 223 ammunition. .556, this gun runs like a sewing machine. It's fantastic. The recoil and everything, the recoil impulse is very light, just like you would expect for a rifle length gas system. But I'm still a little angry about the slight undergassing in 223 ammunition. As you know, that a big thing for me is reliability. That something has to be ammunition blind. I shouldn't have to run 5.56 ammunition in something in order for it to be able to run effectively. I should be able to run whatever type of ammunition through it. Now, a couple people have mentioned, and I also mentioned in that video, that ballistic advantage this is an 18-inch ballistic advantage barrel with the ops number 12 cut, just to remind everybody here, and the appropriate collar and brake system for the ops number 12 to be able to work with the AEM5 suppressor. It has been frequently mentioned that ballistic advantage for a little while had a run of barrels that were undergassed. And there's quite a few people out there who've done videos on like how much more you have to open up the gas port in order to be able to get the gun properly gassed and all that kind of stuff. I'm kind of at a decision point right now. I could either A, go ahead and do the simple fix and keep this barrel while continuing to not recommend ballistic advantage barrels, because I do not at this point recommend ballistic advantage barrels. Or I could scrap this barrel entirely and go with a new 18-inch barrel with the ops number 12 cut. And that's kind of the direction that I'm leaning right now, because I am unhappy with ballistic advantage overall, and if I'm not going to recommend them, then why would I continue to use them? That's kind of where my thought process is at the moment. So with that being the case, guys, I am open to recommendations. I've been looking at Criterion, which was actually which was one of the barrels I was looking at when I originally put this build together. However, I could not find them in stock. I built this around 2020, 2021 time frame, and you could not find parts. It was actually very difficult to get this gun together from an availability standpoint. Okay, so I'm still unhappy with the gassing. Probably going to get a new barrel. How else has this gun been shooting? I've got to say, guys, I really do love the weight and balance of this rifle. Of course, the bipod throws it off a little bit, but I've been doing some like sprints and stuff like this, jacking up my heart rate to then kind of create calm and make more distance shots. We're not like shooting out to like super long range, but like 50 yards and stuff like that. I've been working on kind of dialing in my throttle and all that kind of stuff. This is still this optic setup with the 2-to-7 power Vortex Crossfire 2 and the SIG Romeo 5 red dot is absolutely fantastic. I've not really had a chance to run this rifle out to distance though. I do have a range nearby me that goes out to like 500 or 600 yards, and I was shooting there for a little bit. However, I can't stand that range. I can't stand how it's run. I don't like the RSOs. They are unnecessarily abrasive. There's a lot of like extraneous rules that don't really make a lot of sense, all in the name of safety, because if you just say safety whenever it is that you make a rule, you're automatically right, which is not how things work at all in reality. And just in general, it's even closer to my house, but they it's not a well-run range, and I don't like their attitudes. I don't like their disposition. I don't like how they treat new shooters. I don't like how they treated me. So I stopped going to that range. It's very unfortunate because the range that I'm a member of now only goes out to 200 yards when it comes to shooting these more precision type setups. But it also has berms, special use berms and stuff like that I get access to as a member in order to be able to do more dynamic type drills, which I didn't really have at the other range. So I guess you kind of take the good with the bad. Also, the RSOs leave me alone, which I greatly appreciate. Okay, well, how's it been shooting accuracy-wise? Well, previously, as was previously covered in the accuracy portion in the other video, I'm getting about just under 2 inches to right around 2.5 inches on groups, which is within my expectation for a DMR style rifle. Which, if you're looking more for like DMR discussion and more discussion about like the history and development of SPRs and recce rifles and all that kind of stuff, I've done other videos on those, links in the description. Now, Ballistic Advantage states that this is a 1-inch rifle with mass grade ammunition. I haven't run any mass grade ammunition through it. I will roll on some targets with some heavier than 55 grain ammunition, as well as some new targets with 55 grain ammunition. But guys, I supply a lot of rifles, a lot of different types of ammunition. I have not taken the time to spend the additional money on mass grade ammunition just for the purpose of making nice tight groups. It's more likely that if I ever have to use this rifle dynamically, I'm going to be using 55 grain, like 5.56 ammo. So that's kind of where I think the more savvy conversation on accuracy comes in at. Now, if we really want to dive into whether or not this Ballistic Advantage barrel is worth it to you to risk the undergassing and see an entire accuracy video dedicated to just this rifle, let me know in the comments so we can see what we can do for that. If it's requested, I'll free up the money for ammunition. If there's no interest, then I'm not going to waste the time. And the money. The money's the more important thing, guys. I supply a lot of different cartridges for the channel, for my own shooting, for my own training and all that kind of stuff. So I've got to stay as budget as I can in order to be able to supply all these different systems. You know, I do stuff on military surplus rifles just as frequently as I do self-defense guns and tactical style rifles. So I can't necessarily put all my eggs in one basket whenever it comes to diversifying funds. Okay, so still, how do I feel about the overall setup for dynamic running? What about this reticle and the power of this optics? 2 to 7 is kind of on the lighter end for what most people put on their SPRs. Well, I do like the 2 power range on this because it's actually pretty easy to be able to work in close with it. Now, this is not an illuminated reticle, so I do not consider this to be like an effective replacement of a red dot. I would still prefer to use this if I'm doing close range type stuff. But if I'm already down at 2 power, it has a fairly forgiving eye box and is not overly powered for shooting under 100 yards. The 7 power is pretty low, but when you consider, I built this rifle to engage out to 600, and the rule of thumb is 1 power per 100 yards. So I've got what I need to be able to shoot that far. Ammunition might be a different thing. 55 grain at 600 yards isn't necessarily going to be the most effective option out there, but I can still stretch the legs with this optic setup. Now, I don't necessarily have a lot of like wind holdovers and all that kind of stuff. It's not a terribly busy reticle. This is the Vortex BDC reticle. But I have enough data to be able to work off of and not be confusing to the eye. This rifle is really preferenced for more close range type fighting, but not necessarily being right on top of the enemy all the time. And also not necessarily spending all of my time at distance, because if I expected to spend all my time at distance, I would expect to run a more powerful optic. It's important anytime that you're putting an AR-15 together that you have a very clear engagement envelope, purpose for the rifle, because otherwise you can wind up really stacking on a lot of weight to a lot of extraneous weight onto what started off as fairly decently light rifle. This comes in at 9.2 pounds without the bipod, just under 10 pounds with the bipod. And without the bipod, this gun is extremely well balanced to where I don't feel like it weighs 9 pounds. Like it's actually really surprising to me whenever it is that I handle it to remember that it's just over 9 pounds without bipod. And that's because I didn't necessarily decide to add lights to it. I could add a light to this, and if I was working in a target envelope where I might have to do a lot of CQB stuff, a light would be more of a valid option for me at that point. But that's not what I built this rifle for. I built this more for like that 3 to 5 distance, or like 2 to 5, something along those lines, where you're engaging more out to distance than you are necessarily fighting close, while still giving myself the ability to fight close with this red dot and the 2-power optic. You know, laser designators and stuff like that. If first off I had night vision, and then if I was doing night fighting type stuff, having a laser designator on here would be kind of important at that point. But I'm not presently doing that, so that added weight is not there. Suppressor, at some point I do want to add a suppressor, the AAM5 specifically, just haven't gotten around to it yet. Suppressors are a thing that I really want to get into, but it's the wait times that are killing me. It seems like everybody's waiting absolutely forever in order to be able to get a suppressor, and until here recently where it seems like the wait times drastically dropped, but we'll see how it goes. But at some point, I will add a suppressor to this, which will also change its weight balance ratio, which is unfortunate, but it's a reality because that's good weight. That adds capability. Might make this thing run better with 223 ammunition, honestly. But this is going to provide suppressing in tactical type situations does have a really fantastic option. It's been found that it does increase overall combat effectiveness to suppress the sound of a gunshot. Now, before I forget, I did change out the charging handle. Originally, I had an extended latch charging handle on this gun, and literally it was just an extended latch. I swapped out the original on that particular charging handle. I swapped out the original latch and just put an oversized one on it. It used to get hung up on gear a lot, and I got that before I selected what optic I wanted to get. And this optic, I don't need a larger latch in order to be able to get around the bell. It doesn't come all the way back over top of the charging handle. So with that being the case, I switched this to a regular latch and threw the extended latch on something else. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers like the changes and updates on this rifle. What are my recommendations when it comes to this rifle? Would I recommend this for duty type use? Well, first off, if you're working for an organization, you're going to have to find out whether or not your home build can be used for duty. Probably not. But something along these lines, an SPR. Would I recommend an SPR for duty type use? It depends. Are you spending a lot of time engaging at distance? Or are you in some sort of like light sniper role, like perhaps law enforcement or something along those lines? An SPR, I think, would be very advantageous to you in that type of application. If you're a patrolman, maybe not as much, unless you're really expecting to have to take some longer shots or something along those lines. I think a patrolman's probably better suited with a little bit shorter overall setup. I guess it kind of depends on where it is that you're working. If you're working in a more rural area or something along those lines, then maybe it's more credible to you, but I think most people would be benefited with a 16-inch or shorter gun with an LPVO. Okay, what about home defense, self-defense? Okay, so from like a self-defense type standpoint, first off, open carrying rifles is just not a long-term sustainable thing. There's a reason handguns are the go-to choice for like self-defense. They're small, light, concealable, all those types of things. Rifles really aren't. If you're talking about a truck gun setup or something along those lines, this is too long. I would not preference this out of a vehicle or for vehicle type applications, especially with the muzzle brake. So no, I wouldn't recommend it for that. What about home defense? Again, it's kind of long. CQB at one point was taught with like 20-inch rifles and stuff like that. However, it's way easier to do it with something way shorter. In addition to that, if you're really being able to like dial up the power on this and be able to use it in a home defense type situation, I would question whether or not you're really defending your home at that point. It's like you're shooting someone down the driveway. And when you get into self-defense type situations, especially at distance, it becomes really difficult to be able to say, oh yeah, I was in fear for my life. I was 200 yards away and he had a baseball bat. Maybe not going to go the way you want it to go. So something to think about there. Okay, well, what about competition type use? Well, an 18-inch gun in competition can be pretty popular. And especially if you're dealing with competitions where you could be shooting from 5 out to 300, 400 meters. This arrangement would make a lot of sense, especially if you're dialing back and forth between those two. With this optic type setup, you can go ahead and have yourself dialed up to 7, take your distance shots, and then flip over and get your close range shots. There's a definite utility associated with that. I don't think this would be a bad setup for any type of competition type setup that, you know, it's legal in, I guess. That's an important aspect. What about hunting? Of course, that comes down to your local state laws, whether or not a, you know, 223 or 5.56 caliber bullet is legal for hunting, you know, deer-sized game or larger and stuff like that. A lot of places don't allow that. Some places it just has to be a centerfire rifle cartridge. Then that comes down to your engagement envelope. You know, how far away are you trying? Like, are the shots that you're making ethical? Which the ethics of hunting and stuff like that is a whole separate video on the channel, link in the description. However, I do think this would be a really great varmint rifle. Like coyotes or something along those lines. I think this would be absolutely fantastic for that type of application. And it'd actually be pretty cool, because then you can kind of take your more defensive style rifle and get an opportunity to be able to get out in the woods with it and actually like shoot it, as long as you're following all of your state laws and all that kind of stuff. What about as a woods gun? I guess it kind of depends on how you define woods gun. If you're talking about like, I'm going hiking, this is not coming with me. If you're talking about like, well, I'm going to bebop around my property in a gator or something like that, and I want to throw this across the back seat in case of varmints or something along those lines, then yeah, this is great for that type of application. This would be wonderful for that. All right, guys. Those are my recommendations. What are my uses when it comes to this particular rifle? This is actually, once I fully get the gassing figured out, this would actually be a pretty fantastic like go-to fighting rifle for me. Now, especially where I live now, there's a lot more open space and stuff like that, to where I could actually get into some of the engagement distances that we were talking about before. You know, so this would be great if I was consistently fighting at 2 to like 500 meters, 600 meters, something along those lines. If I was in a circumstance where the fighting was going to be a lot closer, where I was going to be consistently doing CQB type things, I would preference some of my shorter setups. But this gun, for its observational capabilities and its being able to like reach out to distance and all that kind of stuff, would be pretty fantastic in a kind of end of the world type situation. You know, those scenarios that get dreamt up that haven't actually occurred yet. This would be pretty fantastic for that type of application. And a lot of how you configure this rifle, any SPR, is going to kind of dictate that. So I also did a review on well, actually, let's just go ahead and get into that. What are competitive offerings out there? Now, of course, you could build this rifle any way it is that you want and all that kind of stuff, and you know, whatever floats your boat on that one. But in addition to building, what are options that you could buy? Well, you could go to PRI and you could get a legit Mark 12 with all of the original features and all that kind of stuff, very retro type build. That's an option. That's incredibly expensive. BCM also makes a Mark 12 style rifle, which has been previously reviewed on the channel in my Friendly Fire series, link in the description. That gun, I feel, was set up for more closer range type things. And then Daniel Defense also produces their own DD Mark 12, which I'm not the biggest fan of. It has an exposed gas block, and that's just that just gives me the ick. Like, I've never been a big fan of exposed gas blocks, and it kind of surprises me that a gun at that price point has an exposed gas block. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting. And that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.